Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wharton Tech Talks. I'm Spandana,
And I'm Leon.
and we're the co hosts for Wharton Tech Talks. Today, we are joined by Gad Allon. He's an expert on operations management and has won numerous teaching awards for his work with graduate students. Professor Allon is also the co founder of For Class, a platform that enables professors to drive higher student engagement, and he writes a weekly newsletter on scaling operations, the gig economy, and supply chains. Professor Gad, we are super excited to have you here on the podcast. Where are you calling us from?
I'm currently in my office on campus, so just in front of the love statue on the lovely Penn campus in a fall.
That's great.
Professor, as I'm sure you're aware, we're currently entering the biggest shopping season of the year. And many of our listeners are probably wondering when and where they can find the best deals. With Amazon's Prime Early Access sale, the biggest Black Friday in history, and all the supply chain and inventory issues in the recent year, what are you seeing in retail currently?
Yeah, so it's a great question. We see two different things. We always think about supply chains and we think about the supply side and the demand side. On the demand side, we definitely see more demand than ever. And the reason for that, I think, I'm not an expert on the marketing side, but I think some of that comes from the fact that many people have not visited their families for quite some time. And many people have shied away from actually having large gatherings until now. And so we see more demand for gifts and more demand for overall products and quite a bit of e-commerce demand for electronics and the like. At the same time, firms have massive amount of inventory. So, we are talking about between 2001 and 2002, Amazon increased sales by 4% and increased inventory by 40%. Walmart, something on the order of like 5% increase in demand, 50% increase in inventory. So firms are sitting on a ton of inventory that they need to clear because what we do know, we're not sure when the recession is going to hit us, but it will hit us. And firms like to have cleaner balance sheets when they get to a recession. So it's a great time to get deals, and deals are going to get better and better as we get deeper into the holiday season. And if you're really looking for great deals and you're willing to maybe have your family and friends not get gifts at the right time, wait right after the holiday season. You'll get all these firms will have to clean their inventory and there will be just ample opportunities around. Amazon, as you mentioned, started with these deals early. In fact, they started already in October, telling people don't wait for the holiday season, buy it now. There are deals that may not persist all the way. But actually, if we look at these products, these are not products that they got specifically for the holiday season. It was primarily residual inventory. So as a consumer, going out to shop, that's a great time to do that. If you have a little bit of patience, it's going to be even better later on.
Yeah, seems like a good time for consumers. We've heard a lot about how the consumer has stayed strong, and it makes sense that people are visiting their families now and they need gifts. Onto the pricing side, you wrote in June about how we're likely to face stagflation and rising energy prices due to things like historical precedent, indicators like inventory to sales ratios. Have things changed since the summer? And could you talk us through like how things like the bullwhip effect are impacting the overall environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. So maybe a little bit on what the bullwhip effect people are talking about. And let me look at an industry that has suffered from this issue in a slightly higher, maybe bigger magnitude than others, and that's the automotive industry. So let me take us all to the beginning of COVID. March 2020, I know looks very far in the rearview mirror at this point, but you're an automotive executive. You hear about the fact that there is this pandemic coming in, all the workplaces are shutting down, and you tell yourself what's going to happen. We probably are going to get into a recession. You tell all of your suppliers to stop manufacturing. You tell all of your suppliers of semiconductors to stop shipping you things, and you embrace for what's going to come next. 2 months in, May, you realize that there is more demand than ever to cars. Why? Because people have more income than they thought. People don't use public transportation. And most people have more income also because they don't spend it on travel and hotels and restaurants. And so you go to your manufacturers and tell them there is actually more demand than anticipated. But these places, by now, if this is an engine manufacturer, that's okay. They will try to come back once their lockdowns in their country are down. But what about semiconductors? Those are actually you need for the navigation systems, for many, many other different things in your system. They by now diverted their capacity to manufacture cameras because all of us work from home, and microphones because we need now to use it on podcasts. You take all of that. And so now if you are, let's move away from the automotive manufacturer and look at manufacturers of semiconductors, they are overwhelmed by demand. And so what do? They start trying to manufacture more, and they start ordering more from their suppliers. So if you go and look one more tier into the supply chain, they get even more requests. So now everybody's now, when they see this signal, and that's sort of like the heart of the bullwhip effect, is that when I see a signal and you tell me that you need more, it's not only you, it's Ford and GM and GE and Tesla. And now you are a manufacturer, let's say you are Samsung, and you see all of this and you say, I need to allocate demand between them. How should I allocate it? And you go to your suppliers and inflate your demand even more because you now need to provide all of that. So now everybody's ordering more. Now, the reality is that if you look at inventory of automotive, for example, the main issue they had was that usually a manufacturer will carry 30 days of inventory. Like if you look at the dealerships, they went down to something on the order of like a few days of inventory. All of that is great until the music stops. When the music stops, it means that now we have too much capacity, too much inventory. Prices start going up. Why do they go up? Because shortage of capacity, so people are willing to pay more. Transportation costs more. Gas prices cost more. People buy less. So now everybody built a lot of inventory. That's not only automotive, retail, everybody built more inventory. And now we get into a place where demand starts slowing down. So now what do? You start actually ordering even less. Now, start going back now to the same supply chain story. The further you go up the supply chain, so the value stream, the more inventory you carry because you probably inflated demand even more. And you're probably going to be hit harder because you're much more susceptible to these shocks. Or if you are GM or Ford, you have enough credibility to withstand something like that. Tier 1 suppliers, still okay. Tier 2, Tier 3 suppliers, not so much. They depend a lot on a specific industry, on a specific player. So we call it a bullwhip effect because a very, very small fluctuation close to the consumer gets amplified the further you go up the supply chain. Now, when you go back now, we call the reverse bullwhip, where now as we go back towards the consumer, the price fluctuation get amplified. So why was worried and still a little bit worried on stagflation is the following reason, is that on one side, we see a significant price increase. At the same time, we see a massive amount of inventory that's still carried. Most of this inventory was bought at a very high price when there was significant shortage. So firms will have to find a way to clean this inventory to a consumer that by now does not need as many parts as they thought, not willing to pay as much as they were willing to pay before. And usually as you go again back deeper into supply chain, firms will start going bankrupt. Firms are going to start hiring fewer people, in fact, laying off many people. And that ultimately creates a situation where there is still an inflation because firms are interested in recouping some of the cost of what they bought in a very high price, but the economy overall is not growing. I'm not sure if we're going to see that, but just there's so many moving pieces here, and many of them are pointing towards a very recessionary influence of all of supply chains.
Yeah, and if we go down the supply chain to the customer, especially like maybe half a year ago, 1 year ago, when inventories were depleted, retail dealt with a lot of issues with things like stockouts and being out of item. What kind of tactics did retail implement with some success to improve that customer experience? Was there any tech that they put into place?
I would say the best tech that I can think about is, there are two things that you can do, right? One is, do you try to forecast things better? So in my newsletter, for example, I wrote about what Instacart has done to try to provide their customers with better information on what is more likely to be stocked out. I thought that was an interesting situation because overall supermarkets have hard time figuring out what they have on their shelves. It may sound shocking, but that's the reality. Most retail stores don't really know what they have in their shelf. They do know in general, but they have significant inaccuracy. And what Instacart, through a series of experiments, have shown is that by informing on things that are made likely to be stocked out, you can actually steer customers away from these and have them make better choices. So that's one. The second thing you can do, of course, is build a more resilient supply chain. What I see firms is using technology to better understand and map their supply chain and get better warnings on where things are. So if you manage to build a more resilient supply chain, you might not have the right product at the right place, but you'll have a substitute product. You'll know when things are coming. You'll be able to share information with your consumers on where they're going to come. But the reality is that if you look at supply chains, they are still lagging in terms of how much technology we see. The key word that I hear over the last years is this notion of digital twin. Digital twin is this idea that you can run a real-time simulation that will mimic the transformation and flows in your supply chain and will understand how, if you miss, for example, if one of your suppliers now, their container is stuck in the Suez Canal, you can immediately understand what's going to be the impact of that. But the reality, adoption of that is massively lagging. Most organizations barely do forecasting well, have hard time figuring out what's on their shelf. So we're really, when it comes to supply chain, we're still very much in first order issues rather than trying to use sophisticated technology to try to understand how to solve that. So most of the solutions are currently forecasting better, giving better information, understanding better where things are on the back end.
Yeah. And staying on the topic of retail, a lot has been written about the impact, environmental and otherwise, of fast fashion. Is there any way this category can become sustainable, or what does the future look like for fast fashion?
It's a great question. I think to understand the impact of fast fashion, we have really to look at the entire life cycle of a product. I should say the most expensive thing to do when you manufacture a product is actually manufacturing it. The dyeing and the fabrication of the fabric is usually extremely harmful in terms of energy, so footprint, as well as water. The amount of water, for example, that you have to do to create a fabric, primarily actually natural fabric, like silk, for example, is immense. So that's one step that is extremely harmful in terms of overall sustainability. The second, actually, interestingly, is the move from the retail shop or location to the consumer. Why? Because up to that point, most of the work is done through some type of batching. This step is usually done one at a time. So when you mobilize the fabric from your store to your home, or you ship it from a nearby warehouse to your home, that's a fairly expensive step, not only cost-wise, but also in terms of the amount of energy needed to do that, and without the carbon footprint. So then you say, well, but both steps have to be done, whether it is, a fast fashion or slow fashion. But with fast fashion, imagine now that you wear something only 3 times and you throw it away. You take all of these costs and all of this immense footprint and you spread over 3 usage. However, compare that to a situation where you now buy something that is multi-season, you're going to use it for 15 years. So this initial upfront cost was harmful. And in fact, interestingly, natural fabrics are sometimes more harmful than synthetic ones. So fast fashion actually does one thing well, which is some of their fabrics are actually synthetic and have relatively low impact in general in terms of the amount of water needed to make them. But then if you use it if you throw it after the season and you ship it on demand, so you want to, not only you see it on the website, but you ship it so you have it the next day, the combination of these two is extremely, extremely harmful. So basically, I think there is an inherent issue here with fast fashion, which is it's inherently trying to have you consume more than what you need. And that, I think, in the long run, will always be extremely, extremely harmful. In fact, the cheaper things, so in the past, we would say, well, what about the end of life? The end of life is not that hard, not that expensive. It can be harmful primarily because some of these are not degradable. So you have many landfills that occupy these. And again, the more fast fashion it is, the more you'll have to put it in a landfill rather than recycle it later on. As cost of manufacturing becoming cheaper, it's actually people have less interest in recycling things and using them for rugs and for other things and actually just throwing them into landfills. So we'll see probably there is a disaster waiting to happen in many developing countries where there is massive amount of fabrics waiting and there is no one interested and has the appetite to recycle them. So fast fashion, the only way to make it viable is to actually make it a slow fashion. And that's us as consumers, I would say, more than anything else. Buy things that are multi-seasons, buy things that are multi-years rather than things that you want to wear once for the party and throw it away afterward.
That's definitely great advice. And one of the things that you kind of have talked about in the past and you just mentioned was around, operations. We are still solving some of the first order problems, right? And, you've written a lot about automation and how that's been top of mind from, in the field of retail, from Amazon warehouse pickers to delivery bots. Where do you see the greatest opportunities, and how soon do you think these changes will actually be implemented?
It's a great question. I think automation has been in general lagging in adoption compared to expectations. One of my favorite books, many of my students know my favorite books, is The Goal by Eli Goldratt. And the book, which is an old book by now, starts with the story of a professor that meets a former student that tells him about the fact that he's going to a conference to talk about the robotic innovation that they brought to their plant. And he asked them, okay, so did you actually create value with that? And he says, did you sell more? And he says, no. Did you fire anyone? Did you reduce costs? He says, no. Do you carry less inventory? And he says, no. So what did you do? And many, many years after that, we still see the same issues. We see robots around, but most of them need more people to support them. You need more inventory around because you don't know when something is going to go wrong. And in fact, you don't really sell more because of that, because no one cares about the fact that you have inventory in the back end. So definitely, we have many robots in our life, right? Search engine, change how lawyers behave. Right? Many lawyers in the past, most of the work that they were doing were primarily searching within documents. And so that is being reduced significantly. No one needs lower entry lawyers anymore. You only need the partners at the top. When it comes to warehouses and supply chain, the reality is that robots are very good. I'll give an example. Amazon had for many years already, several years, these robots that they are called Kiva. Kiva was the name of the firm that they bought. These are robots that go underneath your aisles and continuously are shifting the aisles and bringing the aisles closer to the pickers, people that actually pick and pack. But picking and packing were still done by people. You ask yourself, why in 2022 people still do picking? Primarily because picking requires a lot of dexterity, requires identifying the product, and requiring placing it in the correct way within the box. All of these things, when you're dealing with hundreds of millions of products, it's very hard to train a robot. A robot is very, very good if you need to drill the same hole in the same place in exactly the same depth again, again, again. So the main change that we see, in fact, Amazon just announced a new robot that will be able to pick and pack a product. It will be able to get, according to their numbers, to 65% of the quality of a person, which is much, much, much better than everything you've done in the past. But notice the number. It's still not even close to the accuracy of a person. But that's the beginning, right? I mean, that's the thing has been really where robots were lagging. Robots were lagging, and automation in general, in being very flexible and being able to use judgment. And so what we see recently more and more is robots that are becoming more flexible in addressing through visual recognition, identifying more things, robots that are, there are firms that are now thinking about a different angle of operation, which is dealing with customer support. Most of us that have to deal with bots know that bots are not very good in answering our questions. But there are firms already getting into answering your emails. Think about how many communication you have with the firm where most of the communication is done by email. What they're trying to do, they're trying to automate most of the work. There will still be a human in the loop. And still will be someone that will look at that and say, sure, this is the right email. Maybe let me correct that word, just make it more nuanced and send it again. This bot will learn over time again, again, again. And I think that's sort of like where it's somewhat, we'll see development primarily in making automation being able to do 65, maybe 70, maybe 90, maybe even 95% of the work, but keeping the human in the loop and making sure the automation can take the things that were primarily you need very precise work, not very flexible and require judgment work, then I would say we'll see a good symbiotic relationship between that. And that's the thing where the development is going to be. The same, by the way, with forecasting. If you look at the best forecasting mechanism, they need someone in the loop to try to say there is something here that doesn't make sense. I'll give an example. 6 months ago, Walmart allowed their store managers to circumvent their forecasting system because their automated forecasting systems ordered too much. Now you say, how is that possible? Through COVID and many changes, it was almost impossible to forecast what came the week based on what we've seen over the last 3 weeks. So systems are very, very good if history can tell us about the future. And humans are very, very good in situations where there's actually a significant change. And so situation where you can actually balance the two, I think is a thing where we're going to see the major inroads in technology overall in the world of supply chain and operations.
No, that's a really great insight. And, the statistic you mentioned around only 65% or what a human can do, that's where we are at. It's actually pretty surprising to me. And in your view, when will this become, when will there be more mainstream adoption where robotics becomes the norm in, say, use cases like, in an Amazon warehouse or in other settings? Do you have a prediction, or do you have a year number in mind?
So I would say I don't have a year, because when I was in, teaching these things in 2000 for the first time, my expectation was that we are 5 years away. And now we're 17 years after that, and we're still not even close. So
Right.
I'll shy away from that. But I'll say that, to me at least, so think about, like, one of the best innovations in our home is the dishwasher.
Right.
The dishwasher, however, is doing something very, very specific, which is washing the dishes. But think about how much work you're doing around the dishwasher to allow that dishwasher to do a great job. So as long as we're going to expect the robot to organize our entire warehouse for products that were packed in random ways, just because we expect them to do that, we're not going to see any meaningful improvement. One example, think about the term search engine optimization. Search engine optimization is basically people building their website so it's easier for a Google bot, a robot, to best find them. What we'll see over time that Amazon is going to go, in my opinion, going to go to the firms that sell on Amazon and say, if you want to be on a next day delivery, you have to pack it in a way that our robot can actually hold it, carry that in a way that we don't need to train our robot differently. And if you want to guarantee a next week delivery, then keep your own boxes and that's going to be okay. So we will have to change our behavior and the supply chain behavior for robots to be able to do a better job. By the way, same for self-driving cars. If we're going to say self-driving car, you should learn how we behaved and you'll adopt, well, we will not change. We might be 50 years from now still talking about that should happen in 5 years from now.
No, that's very insightful. And actually, just to switch gears a little bit, a lot of your work is around scaling operations. And in the last 2 years, we've seen this seesaw where now VCs have shifted from prioritizing companies that grew at all costs. And now instead, they're moving to companies that are focused on margin improvement. So, what's your take on how a startup should think about balancing growth versus margin improvement in today's macro environment?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I have my framework that I teach in my class. It's called SCALE. It's a mnemonic device to say that you need to ask yourself, are you scalable? What are the constraints? Are you aligned? What's the state of your leadership? Are they ready? And the last word is efficient. Are you efficient? Now, the word efficiency in my world means, do you know how to make money? Which basically means, is there a repeatable, predictable path to profitability? And I have to tell you that over the last 3 years, people said, no, we're not going to ask that question. What do you mean by profitable? There is no one asked us to be profitable. In fact, if we're going to focus on profitability, we're going to be killed by the competition, which focuses only on one thing, which is growth. But I was adamant. I think, to me, at least one sentence that the CEO of the founder of Southwest Airlines like to say, the next recession is always behind the corner. The point here is that, sure, when you start, you have to think about the biggest risk, which is that no one really wants your product. So finding product market fit is an absolutely must. And if you don't find that, that will kill you. That's what we call the value hypothesis. Then comes the next hypothesis that you need to validate before you actually start massively scaling. And that's basically the growth hypothesis. Can you make money per customer in a way that's higher than what it costs you to acquire them? Can you make money on a unit basis? Can you make money as an enterprise? And so the point here is that there are firms, if you're in a social network, for example, many times you do have to prioritize growth over efficiency. But the point I want to think about is the following. And again, we see it now as we're heading into a recession and VCs are much less comfortable with just pouring money into more and more growth, is that growth for the sake of growth will always fail. Growth for the sake of providing a deeper moat is exactly what firms need to do. What is deeper moat? Deeper moat is one that will translate into more efficiency. So I'll give an example. Lemonade is a firm that many people follow. If you look at their spend, they spend, like, their marketing spend is 104% of their revenues. Again, 104% of their revenues goes into marketing spend. I'm not talking about any cost beyond that. Now, what's going to happen where you will not be able to grow anymore at that rate? your entire valuation is tied to one thing, growth, because you have no margins. So every aspect of your valuation is tied to your growth. And since you have not built any type of efficiency, you have nothing to back, nothing to go into when now a recession is coming, where the cost of when your customer is just not just unwilling to get your product anymore, right? I mean, that's going to happen to any firm. So the point here that I'm trying to make is that we are now in tough times, but to me at least, you cannot wait for tough times to think about that. You don't have to be profitable, but you have to think about how am I going to translate growth into profitability.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, I personally also worked in the e-commerce industry. And so a lot of what you said makes a lot of sense to me. And one of the things you'd mentioned was around airlines. And, that's a topic you've written a lot about. And it's clearly top of mind around the holiday season. And air travel was severely impacted this summer. And, while operational reliability has now improved, it's still hard to say that it's returned to business as usual. In your view, what's causing these interruptions, and do you think we will return to normal soon?
So airline is a tough industry. Let's start with that. It's a tough industry because if you look at the unit economics, it's an industry that in the long run, very hard to make money in. There's so many different players in that value chain, from airports to food providers to pilots to flight attendants to right. It's real. Like if you look at the unit economics of an airline, they start making money only in seat number 97, 98, 99 on a plane. Very high fixed cost with so many other players that are continuously trying to take money from that value chain. So now you take that, and that's on a regular basis. Then you hit it with COVID. Then you hit it with also issues that have been there before COVID, which is the significant shortage of pilots. People have been anticipating that since at least 2015. The fact that there are not so many pilots, the pay is too low. Many people do not want to go into this business. It's actually, the days in the 60s of the Mad Men days where it was glorious job. That's not the case. Right? In the past, you were the only people who were traveling. Now everybody can travel. And you don't have to do that while holding a stick for 16 hours. And so fewer people want to be pilots. And so we have significant shortage there. And many of the locations that airlines go into are locations they do not want to go into. In fact, there is agreement within the airline industry that many of what they call puddle jumpers, these are sort of like the short flights that you see. You land in Philly and now you take a short flight to Downingtown and then you continue a flight to Lehigh Valley. They're expensive to operate. Pilots do not want to do them. And many times they're there because of all kinds of red tape. And so now we get to a point where airlines basically say, here's an opportunity. We're going to claim we don't have enough planes and we don't have enough pilots. We're going to reduce some of these. That will also allow us to increase the pricing. So prices have gone up. The situation now is that the airline industry is also a very volatile industry that is extremely subject to any small disruption. When you're dealing with that tight, a knife edge situation, weather issues, strikes, like in Europe, for example, there were massive strikes over the summer of flight attendants and employees. Delta is getting into potentially a strike by their pilots. So it's an industry. You think about the following: putting a plane in the air, once it's in the air, it's very easy to operate that. It's like running a hotel. But the moment you land, 50,000 issues start arising. And so it's an industry that I don't envy. In fact, if you look at the only airlines that really, really do well, it's usually those that are funded by the government, their government. Either they get free access to labor, free access to gas, or they just don't care about service at all. Like Spirit, right? If you're Spirit, then you say, well, we just don't care for anything. We'll just not provide you anything. It's literally a bus. You'll be lucky to actually land wherever you are, not unsafe, but just, that we're not going to tell you, give you anything. Then it's easy to run it. But if you try to do anything beyond that, it's very, very hard to do. So the disruption are just because of that situation. When you have such a tight system, any small disruption is massively affecting you. That's true for weather, but also true for other things.
Yeah, so interesting. Such a large industry, like everyone flies, but not an industry where anyone can make really great profits. And I guess as a consequence of it getting commoditized, like it's a race to the bottom, and players like Spirit, the other frontier low-cost airlines are doing very well. Professor, we're going to pivot a little and ask you a couple of fun rapid fire style questions. We won't go too far from the topic at hand. What's your favorite airport?
Yes, so it's interesting. My favorite airport is probably one of the most hated airports in the US and probably one of the worst airports in the US. That's Newark Airport. For a long while, I lived in Chicago and would fly to Israel through Newark. So I know Newark, every small terminal, every small coffee place, every small nook and cranny within the lounge. I like how it's connected to the train. I like how it's easy to get in and out. I know it's a hated airport for many, many people. I love Newark.
It sounds like your second home for sure. Who is a world or industry leader you look up to?
So I'll stay away from world leader. Actually, there is no one that I really, I mean, each one of them have their own baggage. But industry leader, I'll go with Hayek, Nicholas Hayek. Nicholas Hayek was the guy that was tasked with basically killing the Swiss watch industry as a banker and came and said, as a Western country that is very high cost of manufacturing, we need to find a way to actually resurrect that. We need to find a way of making things. And to do that, we need to have a new business model, we need to have a new product strategy, and we need to have a new operation strategy. So very seldom you see many people, let alone bankers, that understand product strategy, operation strategy, competitive strategy. The only thing we remember from it is Swatch, but Swatch is such a big conglomerate that has so much underneath that with so much innovation driven really at the platform level, if you will. Really admired what this guy has done.
It sounds very inspiring. And, now it's time for our final question. And I'm personally very excited to hear that given all the insights that you've shared with us. So, what is your boldest, most unique prediction that folks might feel is a moonshot about, operations and the tech industry broadly, but that you believe will happen in the next 5 to 10 years?
I'll say that full-time employment at a firm I don't think it's going to be 5 to 10 years. I think it's going to require a little bit more, 25 years. I think our kids we still may work at a firm. Our grandkids will be gig workers. But I said in the most positive possible way. You'll be essentially the monopoly of your own domain. You just need to be educated to be one. So I think the notion of full-time employment at a firm is a recent thing. Firm will still exist, will still hire managers and very flexible employees that can actually manage other players. But actually having someone that just do one single task for your firm, that will disappear. People will not want to do that. And firms will not want to employ the people that want to do that. So a gig model overall, where don't think about an Uber driver, but think about like an Upwork person. Think about someone that worked for a firm like Catalan, someone worked with someone like Fiverr, and the ability of them that to get to a much, much more diverse set of opportunities, and firms to tap into opportunities that they've not had before. I'll give an example. I speak, and as we're doing that, I'm using a microphone here, and I have a whole system here with a preamplifiers and amplifiers. To optimize that is very, very hard. So I went and found someone on Upwork that is a professional guitar player, has a studio that he runs. He lives in Portland, and that's already the second microphone that he helped me optimize. Now, Wharton cannot hire people like that. We don't need a sound engineer full time. This person until now lived only in Portland, but now has access to many other people all over the world that he can help and tap into. And I think the combination of these two is just the moment we'll remove the stigma of being a gig worker. Maybe we need to find another name for that. But this is my prediction that the people that have something to offer will not work for firms.
Wow, that's very cool. And I'm looking forward to that day when, we can all work part-time maybe and just be participants in the gig economy. Thank you so much, Professor Gad. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you for making the time.
Thanks for the invitation.